So I'm just trying to get clear on this. So what you're basically saying is that we have no control over our human responses and reactions. Well, what I think you're intimating is that any reaction will just come and go, probably lessens in impact, but there's an imprint there, a unique imprint as Kalyani and Pete and Iain, whatever, that still is going to act a certain way in certain situations.
It'll
Is
just
that
act,
what you're...
Yeah, it just acts the way it acts. And like, how many times have we said to ourselves, right, I'm not going to say that. When I get home, I'm not going to mention this. I'm not going to go near that topic. And you walk in the door and bang, and you immediately start the speaking of the exact opposite of what everything you decided not to do. Yeah, it's pretty obvious we don't have any control over this.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree. Let's go there and see what happens.
Yeah.
We won't spend too long on this because I don't want it to get too far off track in terms of your story and your work. I want to come on to as well. But we had one of the guests we've had on Conscious TV is Dr. Joe Dispenza, who has worked a lot with neuroscience in the brain. And we have actually John Hegelin coming in this afternoon, who again has worked a lot in that area. And as I understand it, what they're basically saying is that there are neurotransmitters in the brain that the more a certain reaction happens, it strengthens those neurotransmitters. And there is a way of saying, if you want, and you can be the I, but maybe it can also be the greater consciousness. Maybe we haven't got time to go into that argument, but there's a way that you can say at one level, I'm not going to reinforce that pattern, that reaction, and then physically they've verified this physically. The neurotransmitters that have that or carry that reaction weaken, and that reaction dissipates and in time disappears. So how does that fit in?
But see, the distinction is the life force itself will do this or that. Yet this I that people often identify with, it really doesn't do anything. It just thinks it does. You know, like you can measure that a synapse fires and then a thought happens. There's a measurable delay. So the life force is doing everything. And so it's a matter of just not identifying with the I. Yeah, I understand from listening to what you're saying, there's no contradiction. It's just that people get caught up in that I can make this happen or I can create something. And the life force does the lot, including creating the fantasy that the I can do something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm also really interested in is how you work with these bankers, and bankers haven't had great PR recently. Talk us through. So you've had a lot of, you've done a great journey, both of you. A lot's happened, a lot has changed, a lot of realizations, and you both feel you're living in a fairly pretty much a non-dual space, I guess. So how do you work? And here is a banker who's driven by the profit motive because his shareholders demand big profits. He wants his big bonus. How do you work with these guys?
Well, we usually start, the first thing we do with working with corporates is start with the whole story making, the internal dialogue. And start with listening. And the reason most people can't listen is they're already talking to themselves.
Okay, now, so explain that more clearly.
Well,
so people can't listen because they're talking to themselves. What does that mean practically?
In practical terms, internal dialogue, which is the commentaries inside the head.
Okay, so that's going to mean... Okay, I think I understand that. But just be more... For people that are watching that don't necessarily understand internal dialogue, that means that is someone that's got a thought process and they're saying like, oh, it's going to be a difficult day today because I'm meeting that kind of thing. So it's preempting what's going to happen to some extent.
Or running a particular attitude or a particular point of view, or running a commentary on somebody or something. And so just bringing that to people's attention and just pointing out that you can simply stop it.
Well, that's it. Okay, go on.
Yeah, well, you can do it right now. You know, so if you start, and whether you're saying a word out loud or if you're talking to yourself, you just tell it to stop, it will stop.
Okay, so let me just have a think about how it works for myself. It's true I can stop something, but often it's work to stop it.
Yes. But
it's like I've got to really stay with something else to be present, follow my breath, and then, yes, something will calm down, eventually stop. Yeah. But what you're saying is a technique to instantly stop it?
Just stop it. I just tell them to stop it and then show them how to just stop. And another tip often we give them is to use the senses, which is ancient Dzogchen stuff. Just, you know, like notice the seeing that's happening right now. Be aware of the hearing, what's coming in with your ears right now. Be aware of the feeling, the sensing, the sensations of feet on the ground, hearing the sounds that are around.
Good. Yeah.
And so just with the ancient Buddhists talk about the 5 senses wide open, equally balanced. Whereas modern human beings tend to be up in their heads running stories. And so by firstly just pointing this out, because awareness is the first step to any change. Once you're aware of something, it no longer can have its same automatic pull. Because all habits are just things that have dropped out of awareness and just run mechanically. So bringing it into awareness and offering people some practical tips that are reminding factors. And of course, what you do is I'm talking to the life force that you are, and you either take it on board or not, and it may just spontaneously come up to do it. So the first thing I do with people is I help them become very present, very here, stop the stories.
So you encourage them to hear the sounds in the room, to feel their body?
Yeah, just so that the people love some tricks. So that's a trick just to sort of point out.
Yeah.
And then I just get people to be in touch with their authenticity and to be present to whatever's happening for them. And once you're congruent and authentic, you become much more trustworthy. And I remember talking with a group of leaders in Sweden where I'd been working for a number of years, because they love this stuff, particularly the Swedes. And he said, this is fabulous in business. You know, like we go into meetings now, meetings just take minutes that would take hours, because there's no longer this positioning or ego games or second guessing. Everybody is present, still and awake, and we just align and a decision just comes up. And then we just get it. So what was a 2-hour meeting is now done in minutes.
Okay.
And so they find it incredibly practical, because it's they're much more in tune with one another. Their empathy is highly increased, and their operational intelligence is increased because they're making high quality decisions.
Yeah, I noticed for myself too that this thing of the kind of decision coming up is very true. It's kind of usually when you look at something and you give it space, the correct way the decision emerges.
Yes.
It's not like you think to start with, God, I have to make a choice between this and that, and he wants this or that. But somehow, if somehow you can give it space,
it just
pops
appears.
up and it's kind of made itself.
Yeah. Like an analogy I often use, Ian, is that here's the ordinary way of living life. Somebody's working, a task is given to them. Now the tasks may spontaneously awaken memories of inadequacy or God, how I screwed it up last time, or anxiety projections about what will happen when I do this, or other sort of internal dialogues or commentaries. And in the midst of that, useful memories from the past may come up and other ideas about how to do it, and the task is done. Another way of living with this awareness is a task is given. Now, of course, the wiring's still there.